What up, Gravity Gang? Welcome to episode 9. Today, we're here with a very special guest. Gio, how you doing, my brother?
All good, how are you?
Yeah, man, not too bad, not too bad. So, for all of our early followers, you might recognize Gio. He actually featured in a couple of our videos. But for everyone who's new to the channel, you probably don't recognize him. So, Gio, do you want to give us a little bit of background to you?
Yeah, so I guess for the viewers out there, the primary thing that I do is a mix of calisthenics, yoga, and climbing. And I probably started, it's hard to tell when I started because there was no pivotal moment in my journey. It was like more gradual transition into it. If I were to put a timeline on it, I'd say second year of uni, so about like 9 years ago, more or less.
Right.
And that's kind of, I started initially with calisthenics. Well, calisthenics goes way back, but we'll touch on that in a minute. Started with calisthenics, then went into yoga, and then funny story of how I got into climbing as well, which we'll see whether we get into it or not.
Amazing. So, obviously, that's a lot of different disciplines all feeding into one. But the great thing is they're all very cross-pollinating. So, let's start with calisthenics. So, you said that you got into that very early on. Give us a little bit of background as to that.
Yeah, so as I said, no pivotal moment. There was not a time where I didn't do anything at all and then suddenly, boom, started working out and being all disciplined and like that. So I'm quite boring in that regard, that there's no dramatic story or moment. It's more that when growing up, I would do like random push-ups, pull-ups, and that kind of stuff, and it wasn't like a proper workout. It was more like every now and then I'll try what my max pull-ups is. And then by the time I got into what I would call when I started to train properly calisthenics, then I was reasonably good at it. Like I could do 15 to 20 pull-ups back then and had reasonably good hamstring flexibility. And I would say from there I started learning the actual calisthenics skills. So maybe some of the statics, handstand, and so on. Yeah, it's interesting to see because by then I could already do a muscle up, even though I didn't. Well, I learned the muscle up from when I was smaller, so way back in the days. But I wouldn't say I trained calisthenics. I just got the muscle ups because I tried it for, I don't know, probably 10 years before. And
That's the Italian genetics right there, man. You guys are literally, you're just miles above. I mean, Sam, I know you love Italian calisthenics.
Yeah.
Go on, you can.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think most of like the European ones, I think it's a lot more in the culture. So I don't know. Did you grow up in the UK?
No, I grew up in Italy.
Okay, so I'm guessing there's much more of a culture of being outdoors, being active over there compared to what there is here.
There's a much more culture of being outdoors, not that much of a culture exercising. So we'll be outdoors, we'll do some sort of activity, but it won't be, it's more like walking, dancing, that kind of stuff. It's not like exercising. Even now, if you go back, a lot more people exercise here.
Yeah.
There, most of my friends don't exercise, for example. They're totally
But they're more active as
they're
a whole
more
of
active
day to
in
day.
general. Like we walk a lot, we go everywhere to see stuff, traveling and all that. But it's not actual exercise. It's like there's a difference between being outdoors doing stuff rather than properly setting time for a workout and then doing your program there.
So that's interesting because there is a massive gym culture in the UK, especially over the last sort of 5 years. It's really cultivated somewhere. I think a lot of it probably comes from Gymshark and a lot of the Instagram influencers and stuff. So you know, funny enough, you live right on the doorstep of Pure Gym, Bermondsey, and the Arch Climbing Wall as well.
Indeed.
So I'm sure you see a lot of these, just like you say, you see a lot of British people, I guess, working out and training more so than you did back in Italy. But that's, it's really interesting that you say that, in Italy you're more active, but not necessarily doing more exercise. Do you feel like because people in Italy are perhaps more active on a general basis that they don't need to exercise as much as, for example, people here?
Oh dear. I wouldn't know whether they don't need to exercise. I think our culture is quite bad from that regard, or maybe at least the environment I grew in and kind of like the area. Here, people growing up, they are somehow incentivized to work out. There, it's not a thing. At least where I grew up, it wasn't a thing. So when I had to like do those things, It was literally out of my own kind of interest to certain things, essentially. But in my high school growing up, we did, in my physical education, for example, we tried a lot of different things just to try them and get exposure to what things we might like. We didn't necessarily stick with one and kind of build on that discipline. But yeah, I agree. Here the culture is much more, it's better, I'd say, in that regard. In terms of like
It's very
exercise.
different though. I mean, I can kind of relate, I guess, because I grew up abroad as well. Obviously, I came here when I was 15, so no one really exercised. But the culture here for gym, it's a gym culture. It's not an exercise culture. It's much more aesthetics based.
Yeah.
It's kind of guys work out to look good, get big biceps, blah blah, blah, which I'm not saying is a bad thing to do at
It's totally
all.
fine, yeah.
Whereas abroad, I feel like, especially in Europe, maybe even Southern Europe, it's more just, it's so ingrained to just be active and just to
Outgoing.
do stuff. Yeah, to be outdoors. And
Yeah,
obviously you go skiing if you live somewhere that has mountains in the winter. So it's they exercise for a different purpose. And I mean, obviously the food is a lot better abroad. This kind of just being sitting around being lethargic is kind of, it's not really, it's very much looked down upon when you live abroad. Whereas here, I mean, we all know that there's majority of the population. I think the UK has quite a big obesity epidemic. I don't think are we number one in Europe, or is Ireland number one?
Or number one in Europe.
Yeah, I think we're number one.
Okay, I didn't
Either
know
us or
that.
Ireland. I'm not entirely sure,
Okay.
but then obviously because the pendulum always swings both ways, like yin and yang, because we also have the highest obesity problem. I think it's also natural that we also end up also having the biggest gym culture, because people, to escape this section of the population, you kind of have to go the polar opposite. But I think that I would say I would rather someone go to the gym, even if it's for the most vain reasons, than they don't go to the gym whatsoever.
Even if you do the right things for the wrong reasons, it's still good for you. So
100%. Yeah.
agreed.
So you talked about the muscle up, and obviously we've trained with you, Primrose Hill, a couple of times. We've seen your muscle ups there, squeaky clean. But I think one thing that you're a master of is the handstand pressing, shoulder press, all of these balancing, hand balancing. Give us a little bit more insight into that, because I think this probably feeds into the yoga side as well. So give us a little bit of that.
Yeah. Okay, handstand. So I started handstand because I thought it looked cool. As probably most of you, it's probably not the right reason to start handstand, but it just looks cool. So why not learn it? When I was learning it, I started with the actual freestanding handstand with the kick up. Not the best way to start with it, but I started it that way. Got frustrated really quickly because I would do the kick up, and then sometimes it goes, sometimes it doesn't. So I was like, well, I want a way to get it every time and be confident that if I try a handstand, I'll get it, and I'll know I will get it. There's no like wiggle there, whether will I or will I not. So that pushed me on to discovering the press to handstand. That's obviously, it's all force, it's a lot more powerful, but if you can do it, you know that you'll do it every single time. So funny enough, I actually learned the press first, and then I learned the freestanding handstand and straight arm press. Yes. So it's interesting because most people go the other way, and yes, it's true. The freestanding handstand is easier in terms of strength, but in my case, I just wasn't finding the balance that often as I wanted. So I was like, I need a certain way that I'll do the handstand every time, because it's a party trick. At least it was a party trick for me. If I go to a party, I don't have room to be like, oh, I messed it up, let me try again, you know. If I show a party trick, I want to do it and for people to be like impressed, you know. So I started with the press, and then through the process of learning the press, all the various presses and so on, I got better at the other parts of the handstand because I learned how to properly engage what needs to be engaged in order to hold the handstand. So that's kind of like the story there. Again, that was probably like 9 years ago, second year of uni. And yeah, I practiced ever since, and it's going well. I'm actually at the end of my life cycle at the moment in terms of handstands, but...
See, so you guys are literally in the presence of a master. 9 years of handstands.
Well,
that's incredible, man. That's incredible.
Yeah, I'm surprised I stuck to it, actually. I think part of it, sticking with it, was seeing progress and also discovering that once you get the basic handstand, there's so much more out there. And you're literally like a Pokemon building up on your skills in the handstand. and you can go very far with it, basically.
It's definitely the most fun, in my opinion, I'm sure you'd agree, probably the most fun skill in calisthenics, and it's the one which you can train the most often. You can't train, you can't actually get into an amazing front lever probably every day until you're at least conditioned for a year or two.
Yeah.
Whereas handstand, as long as you can as long as you're somewhat conditioned in the wrists, you can do handstands all day long, every single day, as long as you're not kind of taking it too far. And as you say, every single session you can throw something in new. So say you could do a whole year of just doing normal handstands, and then one day you decide to try really wide. I mean, whenever me and you together, it's literally like we're kids just playing around.
Yeah.
Oh, can you do a handstand on that? Can you do this? Can you do that? And it's actually fun.
It's definitely quite a playful skill.
100%.
And you can do it on anything. You know, it's so versatile in terms of how many types of the handstand there are, what you can do it on, different flows. Flows tend to be, especially in the yoga community, not much in calisthenics, but in the yoga community, a lot of things with the legs moving, and I'm sure people have seen a lot of them on the reels and stuff. But I agree, it's a very fun skill to practice.
I mean, I think I think Issam would definitely agree. I think what we like about you most is you're probably one of the most complete athletes we've met in person, for sure. I mean, obviously all these kind of three things, like, what was it, calisthenics, yoga, rock climbing as well, which we'll touch upon, they definitely have carryover to themselves. What do you consider yourself as? If you were to introduce yourself, what would you say?
In terms of the three disciplines, which one is the most prominent?
I guess two questions. Which one do you enjoy the most?
Okay.
And then which one do you... which one's the most prominent, maybe?
Yeah.
Which one do you think has the most carryover?
It has to be calisthenics. So the way I structure my practice on a weekly basis, as long as I've done enough calisthenics work, I can reward myself with climbing sessions. So that's it. And in calisthenics now, my calisthenics practice is more like a mix between, gymnastics and calisthenics. So it's not just strength-based, it's also flexibility-based. So that's why I put together as the umbrella of calisthenics. And then, climbing is for fun. It's social. There's a lot of people there. I mean, climbing community here is extremely developed. And it's very fun to be. We have lots of events. So I like to reward myself when I've done all the good work in calisthenics. If I feel sort of good for that week, then I'll do some climbing sessions.
Awesome. How do you think flexibility and mobility helps in calisthenics? Now, obviously, there's the obvious answer, which is, it helps with a press to handstand. But maybe for someone who's like, you know what, I don't even care.
Yeah.
All I want to do is just muscle ups, handstands, and planche, which arguably you don't need any mobility for. How would you say to someone, actually, no, you're wrong, you should be working on? Say it to us as people that don't really work on flexibility and mobility.
I'll make some classic calisthenics examples. So the first one, let's start with the muscle up. So normal muscle up, like the strict muscle up, do you need much flexibility? No. It's more like a technical plus momentum and some timing in there, and you're good. Slow muscle up, you start to see some things there. Where you start to see things is in the wrists and in the shoulders. So one thing, a lot of times when I do the slow muscle up, a lot of people ask, how is it so smooth, or how can you do it in the first place? A lot of it is shoulder mobility, in that how far can you get your elbow behind your back. Because the more you get your elbow behind the back, the more you can bring the shoulders in front. So you have that nice hollow body positions. And if I don't have a bar with me, but if I can bring my elbow just to here, my hands won't be touching my chest. The bar is really far away from my hands, which makes it a lot more of a powerful move. If I can, though, get my elbows really behind, my hands come, first of all, into the chest, but they're underneath here, and the shoulders come naturally on top. So just being able to do this range of motion is important for the muscle up, for example. Another one, a big one, toes to bar. So when you see people doing toes to bar, they're either swinging a lot because they don't have that compression ability, or their legs are bent, or it's not a toes to bar, but it looks like shins to bar or knees to bar. And I always say it's toes to bar. So you should do toes to bar. In toes to bar, hamstring flexibility is just key. You can't get away without it. You see that limitation a lot in calisthenics park. When people are really strong, they lean backwards a lot, but they don't have that, because in theory, the ideal kind of mechanical way to do toes to bar is to be in a pancake upside down. So you want to get lower, not either side, because the moment you go either side, you start breaking it. So yeah, that's a big thing. And then obviously you have handstand stuff. But I'd say probably not as much with front lever and back lever, maybe not even with flag. But apart from those, a lot of it is flexibility. Same with L-sit. Let's say in the L-sit, you see people bending their knees a lot when they can't straighten them fully. That's hamstring flexibility.
How do you think working on mobility also improves mind-muscle connection? Which I would argue for, say it doesn't help with, you don't need to be that mobile or flexible for front lever, but, or let's say take planche for example, because I know planche works hip flexors a lot, especially straddle planche. I'd argue that although you don't need a lot of flexibility and mobility, when you've built that mind-muscle connection, which you undoubtedly will do by working on your mobility, that should help with your overall mind-muscle connection and body tension. I don't know if that's something that you've noticed in when you perform moves.
Yeah. It does a lot. So flexibility is a tricky one because often it works on ranges of motion that you're not really aware of or you don't even have control over. So if I'll go into the middle splits, for example, at first when you go into the middle splits, your body is just so against it. It's just pulling in the opposite direction that it's just a forcing move. You can't do it. It's very painful because you don't have that awareness of like relaxing into it because your body is fighting. It feels like you want to break it. So it's a natural response. But having that awareness and you build that over time. It's not like suddenly you flip a switch and then boom, it clicks. But having that awareness of, first of all, improved range of motion, basically the idea of the flexibility is that with more flexibility, you're able to better align the angles, the force angles, to make the movement more efficient. Now, what that means, that might mean hip flexors and planche, that might mean hamstring and splits in the handstand, and that might mean, again, hamstrings in L-sit and toes to bar and that kind of stuff.
So, aside from just, I guess, flexibility and mobility for calisthenics, how important do you think it is for just any everyday sort of people? Because this is one thing I try and get across to everyone is you need to have a degree of mobility in your key joints, you know, so the shoulder, especially the shoulders and the hips. I would argue more so in the hips than the shoulders because obviously the hips take more load. You're going to use them for hopefully the rest of your life, whereas, you know...
Sat down as well. Yeah, you sat down your whole life, whereas your shoulders, you're kind of... Even if you sit in a chair like this, your shoulders are kind of... That's good posture for my shoulders there, whereas your hips tight, squeezes in, internal rotation.
Exactly. So I guess here's the two questions, is how important do you think mobility and flexibility is for everyday person? And if it is, how often should they train it?
Yeah, really good question, also very topical these days with what you said, Sam, that a lot of people sit. So think about this. When you wake up in the morning, what I do in the first place, big stretch. You know, I can feel it. I engage a bit the muscles and do a big stretch, and that instantly makes me feel good. It's because I sat a lot, tension builds up throughout the night. So that's a form of flexibility. Now, obviously, it's not within the practice of flexibility, but that should make you think, why is your body naturally want to do that? Because you're stretching, you know, you're releasing the tension, you're stretching a bit, so you suddenly feel good. Now, what I say is, imagine you can take that to the next level. How good would you feel if you just have a practice that you do regularly until like that goes to the next level? And the other thing is like sitting and hips. I totally agree. People are, I'm not sure whether, can we curse here? Yeah. They're fucked. Like people sit all day, their hips are fucked. People cannot move anymore. It's so bad for your spine. It's so bad for your movement in general. It's just horrible. And I'd say it is important to have not just so these are like health related things, right? You have hips here, maybe it affects your spine, maybe you have like back pain. And the other part is the mindset of it. So flexibility, more than anything, I'd say, has to be extremely disciplined. You cannot just be like, I'll do this week, then next week I'll skip it, then the other. It's very disciplined. That builds insane amount of willpower to achieve everything you want in life. When I started what I would say, I had various stages in life, but when I started my flexibility journey a couple of years ago, maybe 3-4 by now, to get to the middle splits, I had to do it every day. And sometimes, you don't always want to do it every day, especially after like the workout. You're tired, you've exhausted all your mental strength already, and you have to do flexibility. That power of being able to do, yes, I will do it, and I have the willpower to do it, that translates into every single aspect of your life. Yeah. So suddenly you're going to find yourself, well, this maybe it's not very pleasant, but I'll do it because I know it's so good for me. And the friction is less because you've built that this mental muscle that removes the friction of doing things that you find uncomfortable.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's kind of the same for exercise, but I'd argue for flexibility, it's almost that step further, because there's kind of, especially initially, there's nothing comfortable about flexibility. Whereas with exercise, even if you force someone who doesn't want to go, pretty quickly on, they'll start to get the dopamine rush. They'll feel good after their first workout. After a stretching session, you'll likely feel irritated because you've probably achieved nothing. Like you want to try and touch your toes, and you've maybe gone from there to there. I know for sure I tend to tense up a lot when I'm stretching. I think it's because I'm quite impatient with it. And I mean, I've done stretching sessions with you, and your method I know is quite different from others. Like, because I'm always asking you, how often should I do this stretch and how many times a day? And you're just like, look, like, listen to you're someone who comes across as you're very in tune with your body. You kind of naturally know when you need to do each stretch. And I remember you saying that you just do it until your body actually relaxes into it. It's not like, once you do 30 seconds of this stretch, you'll achieve X amount of elongation. It's like, no, you need to calm yourself down and feel the stretch happen. And you say sometimes that can happen in like 30 minutes.
Yeah, so I think, so we've said that stretching is helpful for you and you need to do it for health reasons and for discipline reasons. How do people do it? So that comes into what you said, that it's very irritating. That's where the problem comes in the first place, because most people associate stretching with discomfort and pain. There's going to be a certain level of that, but let me tell you that when you go for stretching, you're not going for a sprint, you're going for a marathon that hopefully lasts for your entire life. You can get flexible within, 30 days if you want. You can, but the idea is that you reap the benefits if you keep stretching for longer time, even though you can already do the splits. So not once you've done the splits, boom, you've completed flexibility or something. You still get a lot of benefits from the routine of it. So the first, I'd say, epiphany in stretching is that it doesn't have to be painful. It is painful because you're forcing it. It doesn't have to be painful. So that comes into how do we actually do stretching. So a lot of the time when people start stretching, what do they say? I'm going to go on YouTube, find a video of stretching and do it. And on YouTube, what do you hear? Push it against until you can't, until you're screaming. If it's painful, it's working. Well, why does it have to be painful to be working? What I would say is take it easy. Because you're going to be this in the long run, there's no need from your first day to go all out, just to discover the next day that you're fully sore and you can't move, and then you have to wait for 2 weeks before you can do your next stretching session. So take it easy. First of all, start easy. Start 50%, start 60%, until you start feeling the discomfort, and then you can, there's going to be a period, so before you start stretching, your body is all like tensed and has knots everywhere. There's going to be a period where you're going to do that until that tension within your body starts to naturally disperse. You won't feel that tension anymore. Once you feel like you've gotten past that stage, and that can be different for many people, then you can start implementing some actual stretching techniques that will get you deeper into the stretches that you want to get. So I'd say first tip, don't make it painful. If you make it painful, it goes against sustainability factor. You're not gonna be prone to be doing it for long, because it's a mind game. And even if you have the mental strength to go for long, if you make it too painful, chances are you're breaking things way too quickly, and it's not gonna be, you can't get injured. And I've had that before. I'm quite good at pain tolerance. I've definitely had before where I've ripped something in my hamstring for 2 years, could not even bend up to my shins, because I was like, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna get it, and then boom, too quickly.
What's your opinion on dynamic versus static stretching?
They're both good. They both have their place. Dynamic normally when you're cold. Static when you're warm. That doesn't mean people say when I'm cold, dynamic, therefore I do it at the beginning. It doesn't matter. Excuse me. Basically, anytime you feel cold, you gotta do dynamic first to feel warm, and that means, do you have to do dynamic every time? No, you don't. As long as you feel warm, you can jump onto the static straight away. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you've done some cardio session and you've run and your blood is going, everything is warm. You're warm. You don't need to do the dynamic one necessary. But when you jump into the static, there's going to be an activation period depending on which flexibility methods you're using and what your goals are within flexibility. So yeah, dynamic normally when you're cold, static when you're already warm.
The one thing I want to ask as well, just take it back to the pain thing, because I never, obviously with static stretching, we always try and encourage people to do it to a point of mild discomfort, which I think is quite a universally accepted principle rather than pain, for example. But one thing that you said which was soreness the day after training, like a stretching session, right? That's a really interesting topic because people only associate soreness with, for example, activation of the muscle in the concentric and eccentric loading. You're suggesting that if you stretch properly, you could, or maybe you're overstretching, you could become sore. Do you want to just touch upon that a little bit? Because I'm curious to know a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this comes into the strength aspect of stretching. A lot of people I guess the general opinion is that stretching is just for flexibility and that's it. And what do you do with flexibility? Well, it turns out that you know how gymnasts build muscle and that a lot of their practices straight arm things. Mm-hmm. So stretching, for the most part, is going to be everything extended, fully locked. So your legs are going to be straight. You can build muscles with stretching, and we can touch upon different methods. PNF is like a very popular these days, but you can build very good leg muscles with stretching. So it feeds back into your squats and everything else. Mm-hmm. So I have to say I haven't done much lifting in terms of squats in the past, I don't know, year or two. From stretching, I am confident I can, and I've done it, I can squat at least my body weight added on top just from stretching. Yeah. And you might have seen I've done a reel or two somewhere where I go down in the pancake just with the weight on top. Like that's strength. Sure, if you were flexible, you just like split in half and bump into the floor. You gotta be able to control that. That's a lot of strength, and it's strength. It's a sort of like athlete strength, not just strength that looks good. It's strength that you can generate force from, which is really useful in calisthenics, like especially when you start doing like jumps and all sorts of explosiveness stuff.
I think that's good carry over to rock climbing as well, because obviously, say if you're doing a toe hook, you need very good body tension between your toes, literally all the way to the other arm. So there's a famous Eric Barcy, is it?
Yeah.
So he's an Italian, of course he's Italian, calisthenics guy. He's got 2-finger planche press. So a full planche on 2 fingers on each hand, and then he can press up. He learnt the full planche in 3 months, like perfect planche. And he was a climber before. And I often used to think, but there's no pushing in climbing, so where the fuck does the carryover come from? My theory is because it's from the body tension. So you build very good body tension, literally all the way from your toe all the way to your finger, which you don't really get that much in other sports. Maybe swimming, you might get some sort of similar thing.
Yeah, I can see that.
I'd be interested in knowing how actually you would build strength through, say for PNF, not for legs, say for iron cross. How would that work? How could I increase strength through stretching for a specific skill, maybe like iron cross, which maybe doesn't actually require that much mobility in the first place?
Yeah. So iron cross, I'm not sure about how it works, but I assume if you apply the same, I mean, to be honest, can you apply PNF and iron like in rings in general? I'm not really sure you can, because the whole idea of PNF is engagement and relaxation, and you can't really relax in the iron cross.
I guess you could maybe hold rings, relax, push down, but then even just holding, you're not really in a stretch, are you?
Yeah, no, because it's a very natural range of motion for the shoulder. You're not really going behind or above, so it's not as applicable. But even though if you do like PNF is like engagement and then relaxing, that's more like sets, right? So
Yeah.
It probably doesn't apply there as much. It could apply for like if you go, your hands are behind or above, that could probably apply. But yeah, I guess, so you touch on PNF. Do you know any other stretching techniques or?
You're the master here. I mean, I'll be completely honest, I don't actually stretch all that much. I've often had this discussion with Isan that I found on days where, specifically on a rest day, so say I used to like on Sundays I still do saunas, and sometimes I'll do a long stretching session for maybe 40 minutes, stretch everything. I would feel a lot better. By Monday, my calisthenics skills, specifically front lever, would universally always be worse off. And that was because I found that I performed skills like the front lever best when I'm actually quite tight, when I'm not all loosey-goosey. So I'm someone, I don't avoid stretching. I've just found that actually for short term, for specific skills where I don't need to increase my mobility, and I'm talking more about upper body because calisthenics is more upper body, it doesn't actually help. Lower body, I 100% need to work on my mobility. I mean, I can kind of just about touch my toes, and I've started doing a bit more running now, and I can feel a lot of tightness in my hips.
Yeah, I agree to what you said. Too much stretching can sort of work against you in terms of like upper body, because it pays off to be quite tight in terms of like statics at least. For sure, in handstand it doesn't pay off, for example. But in like toes to bar, if you have good shoulder mobility, you don't have to like lean back. You can actually hang, and the more you hang, the more you elongate, which means the easier it is for you to get your toes to the bar. So a lot of people in toes to bar, they pull up, whereas actually you need to push down to elongate, because then if you have the good hamstring flexibility, it's a lot easier to bring the toes. So that's an area where it would apply. But yeah, it can work against you for front lever and back lever for sure. If everything is moving too loose, you have to work a lot more on like stability and making sure they're strong to keep you in the same position. And if it's moving too much, it's not good. So yeah, it depends on what you're doing. But for lower body in general, there's hardly any. I mean, if you can bring some negatives to lower body stretching, I'll be happy to know them, because it helps with like squats, it helps with like deadlifts, it helps with like everything.
One really interesting area of stretching, and a lot of people find this with back pain, is a lot of people focus on their hamstrings and they focus on their calves, but they don't necessarily focus on their lats very much. And I saw a video recently about how obviously your excessive anterior pelvic tilt or posterior pelvic tilt can impact how loose or how tight your hamstrings and your calves are. But what this guy, he essentially said, you need to also stretch your lats and specifically look at the lower fibers of the lats. I think that could go a really long way in helping just ordinary people alleviate back pain and also postural problems. Is the lats an area that you like to really work on for a longevity perspective, as opposed to perhaps like Sam, for example, saying that when he stretches his lats too much, his front lever suffers?
Yeah, I do stretch regularly in terms of upper body. So I have practice which is like back bending. I'm trying to get better at back bending because I'm not so good, and part of it involves the lats. But also when you do things for handstand, it also involves the lats work. So a lot of it is going to be like things like down dog, for example. Down dog is just a king for like everything in general. But yeah, I pretty much regularly do it because one of my kind of routine stretching sessions is like a deep all body session, and part of it is the last, not just the last, like shoulders in general and hands as well and wrists and everything.
I need to be in that session, man.
No, I mean, absolutely. We can do some good, like, what is it called? When we have a proper workshop, you know? Stretching and just getting, because there's also different ways to stretch, and not all the ways are good for everyone. There's a specific one which I do, which you mentioned earlier, which is more like a mix of all, and I have a reason for it. But yeah, people who are overly flexible, they probably don't need to do certain types of stretches as compared to people who are really tight. It's better if they go a different approach. So it will depend who you tend to be as a person. And yeah.
So one thing, obviously, we've talked about about climbing before, I think, on the podcast, very briefly about how well it feeds into calisthenics. But one thing we've not talked about is yoga, because we haven't had someone on the podcast who is a yogi, if that's what you guys call yourselves.
Okay.
And I think actually looking at other people's channels, like for example Gabbo Saturno, he's very big into yoga. His calisthenics game is very, very good. I want to know from your perspective how well being good at yoga has helped you in developing your calisthenics skills and strength.
Okay. So we're talking about yoga from the performance aspect of it. I'd say yoga is more related to a certain mindset, certain state of being rather than to performance. But okay, if we go with the fact, if we leave, all the philosophy out of it and purely from a performance point of view, it links back into things that are not very tangible, but also things that will make you the ultimate athlete. So what yoga does for you is, first of all, building, yoga is a lot of stretching. Okay, so a lot of the things you do, you'll find that you're stretching a lot. There's also a little bit of strength, but if you want to get strong, you won't do yoga. You would do calisthenics, for example. So where yoga comes into play is unlocking the good angles for you to perform better. So it's stretching, and we've talked about this before, like toes to bar, planche, whatnot. Where it has another effect is the awareness of space around you. A lot of the yoga is upside down, or a lot of the yoga is like on the balancey side. And where it comes into play, for example, in my practice, but in anyone's practice, is arm balancing. If you're sitting upside down and your brain is normally confused of where you are, if you don't have experience at all in any of those domains, then yoga will help with understanding where you are in space and how you can control. And obviously handstand comes into mind. Everything upside down really comes into mind, but not really, just the sense of balance. So like pistol squats as well. It's a big one. And oftentimes you'll see me like do pistol squats on bars and stuff, because the projection of weight. So that comes from yoga, from understanding how to control the balance aspect of it. And then that allows me to push my strength in the right direction, so I make the most out of it. So it's not a lot of like fighting with myself, but works to help me in whatever I want to do.
Yeah, I think balance is such an understated aspect of human movement, which obviously, I mean, the first thing that happens when you're born, right, is you don't try and stand up when you're first born, but like learning how to walk is a massive journey of a baby's life. And obviously yoga, I mean, I went to a few yoga classes. I haven't been in a while, but I was massively humbled from a balance perspective. Everything, like I almost found it stressful for me because I was trying to keep up too much, that I didn't end up enjoying it because I wasn't able to relax into the stretch. And the like old ladies in their 50s or 60s who were just absolutely smoking me.
How they floating though, they make it look so like easy, and it's hard. It's actually hard.
Very hard. It's not only because people think it's just about relaxation, but I remember saying to you when I used to go, it's like you need a lot of strength to do it, because it's strength that you don't really get in calisthenics apart from the handstand. But it's everything in one. I view it's true body mastery. If you can be incredibly good at yoga, I think you'll be good at pretty much everything else. I think you'll have massive carryover to even like dancing, because you learn balance and rhythm, because a lot of it is like being on time with the music. You build very good intermuscular coordination.
I was about to say like body coordination or body-eye coordination, like motoric skills. It's like, as you said, when you're small, you try to walk and you're like, you can't walk, and you build a certain set of motoric skills and you're happy with your body. Yoga is like taking that to the next level. Like you build your motoric skills just get enhanced by a lot, and that comes back into and feeds into any other thing. So
I think you'll learn it very quickly as well, because whenever you do something, I think my theory as to why rock climbers are incredibly strong is because you're putting yourself in a precarious situation. So your body you go beyond your limit. So sometimes obviously better than us, but say if you're maybe doing a dyno and you're trying to grab onto something, like you're gonna exert a lot more force than you would have than if you were just doing a pull-up at a gym. Because your body doesn't intrinsically know that there's a mat underneath you. Your body is up in the air. It's about to jump for something. Your body thinks, oh, if I miss this, there's a potential for death.
Yeah.
So your body's going to exert a lot more force. I think overall your neurons will fire a lot more efficiently. You'll be able to get much more neural recruitment.
Yeah.
So I think that's why they get strong very quick. I think it's probably the same with yoga. Because I remember certain ones when you're balancing on one foot and you really have to focus, like really get in tune with your body.
Yeah.
You can kind of get that with calisthenics. I think you get that with calisthenics more so than the gym, because gym is just...
Yeah, gym, it's not engaging up here
Exactly.
at all. Yeah.
Exactly. But my dad always just say there's a few key things to know when you're really doing well. It's when your full body sweating. So not just when you're stretching from your glands, like your whole body, because that means you're concentrating a lot. Or if when you're doing something you start shaking, you start jittering almost. That's like your neural activity is really firing.
Yeah.
I've never had that when I'm doing normal gym exercises apart from compound movements, which is calisthenics basics.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've lost my train of thought because I agree. But one thing it's so true, and I think with the yoga side of it, obviously like I said, we've not met many people who are not, I guess, yoga experts like yourself. But like Sam said right at the start, the reason why we believe you're a complete athlete is because you do have that level of control over your body. One thing away from the body, and it comes back to what you were talking about with philosophy. This is a really interesting topic because I think for a lot of people sitting outside of yoga, they think of the performance-based, physical-based stuff, just like we just did right now. But perhaps the thing that we should also think about is the mindset and also the philosophy. So can you give us a little bit of insight into that?
Yeah, so the mental aspect of the yoga. So it's popular these days to talk about mental health, and it's popular to link back to the yoga. There's a certain reason for it, but basically the idea of yoga is to make you whole with the universe, if you will. So what that means, because it sounds kind of vague, and I don't like when people tell me like weird things that are kind of vague. So I need to be able to like, what does that mean? Like whole of the universe? Like what are you talking about? Right? You know, like it changed nothing in my life. So being whole of the universe is an idea that our bodies essentially experience the world through sensory experience. So through, touch, hearing, and I'm not sure you guys are aware or not, but all our sensory experiences, they are not perfect. They are an interpretation of how we see stuff. So for example, if I have my eyes and I wear glasses and you wear glasses, so you probably know, if I take off my glasses, my visual sensory experience is going to be worse than his if he sees better than me. That's the same with like perception, like touch or anything. All our sensory experience is basically our body is like a shell, and the better our sensory experiences is within our body, the more we can experience everything around us. What that means is that yoga is essentially a way to expand your sensory experiences beyond your physical body. And what that means is, sure, it may mean things like what we've talked about, like stuff like perception of control and balance. It's not something tangible, but you expand how you perceive the space around you. You can actually feel it. So you'd feel it in terms of like where your center of gravity is within your body as you move through certain transitions. And you do feel it. And if you're not accustomed to that, you have no idea. You'll just fall over. And that's a good application of it is handstands. When you start learning handstands, you have no idea. You go in and you either fall or hold. As you get better at it, you start feeling where your center of mass is and how to control it. So, yeah, go on.
No, go ahead.
So that's one application of it. But in general, yoga helps you. It helps for that mental clarity. Essentially, your body is like a shell, and it's a physical body, and it's getting old. Well, it's gonna get old if it's not getting old yet. But basically, as it's getting old, you start building up all these like tensiony bits or knots or whatever you want to call it. And yoga is a way to like release all that, let go of all that. And then you're just so relaxed that you can, as you said earlier, I think, when you're so relaxed, you can focus more. When you focus more, your performance is a lot better. And it helps with that neural capacity. So it restores it. as opposed to, doing something that doesn't challenge you that much, and your neurons are literally like soggy in a way. This one helps. Think of it as like there's exercises to strengthen your neural capacity, like engaging mind-muscle connection. And when you engage that, you use those pathways. Yoga is a way to like clear. So think of it as a highway. It's always full, as in you're always engaging, having that mind-muscle connection. It's always like stressed, and it gets tired a bit. And yoga is a way to just make room. So decompress in a way from a neural perspective, which why it makes people think so relaxed, like mentally you're very clear, you're feeling happy in general.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be one of those, I'll say sports in quotation marks, that people, it's very much got like a cult following. It's very much a lifestyle based. It's kind of like rock climbing, I would say, maybe even calisthenics. I think is people, once they get into it, they're into it because they really see the benefits. And there's something that I often used to talk about a lot with my dad, because a lot of the stuff we do nowadays, we have to do because we live very unnatural lives. So he even used to argue, I think we had the chat with him when we were inviting filming our first YouTube video. He says humans shouldn't have to stretch. He says, like, you don't see a cheetah stretch before it goes and hunts the gazelle. But it's just because we're so sedentary these days that nowadays, like, humans before probably didn't need to do yoga because they were already at peace. They lived in the moment. They were probably moving a lot. Yeah, they weren't doing like pull-ups, front levers, but they probably did a deep squat. Everything was nice and loose. They weren't always stressed about kind of stuff.
And they
coming
weren't
in the future.
actually. A fun fact: people weren't doing yoga. Yoga, as we know it now, is just like a couple of 100 years old, probably. And it wasn't the thing. It was more of like as I say, it was a mental thing to practice.
Is it true that it was mainly breathing? That actually yoga itself comes from...
It was breathing and a lot of sitting. Basically, yoga tends to build, so to speak, not the superhuman, but the nobody, in the sense that you can sit there, you don't need any food, you don't have any discomfort. Like, your body is mainly existing, is barely existing in a way, in that you don't need anything. And there's famous stories of like yogi people literally going for weeks and months without eating and just sitting in one posture. And that's how you know, because the idea of it is to release of all the burdens of the physical body.
It's crazy that we can do that as humans.
Yeah.
Like, I find that stuff fascinating.
Yeah.
Which is why I think stuff like yoga, calisthenics, rock climbing, it kind of, people like it because I think it flips a switch inside of them that we all have deeply rooted within to kind of be natural human beings, which is why I think people are drawn to that maybe more so than doing kind of gym bro exercises. But even that, I feel like genuinely just using the body for what it's designed for, movement, lifting, pushing, just rhythm, whatever. I think it's just why I think we love doing it. Even swimming, there's actually interesting things where I think we're the only mammal that can be born underwater. And also the reason why out of all the apes that our nose face downwards is so that we can be rested underwater. And most human babies, like, we love water growing up. So I think even that, like swimming, I think would have been something that our ancestors would have enjoyed doing a lot.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, funny thing, I'm not a good swimmer. I tend to, so maybe I'm like just a weird baby. But yeah, I agree. You said something like movement. The moment we stop moving, we die. We literally die. So we're naturally drawn to movement, and our lives somehow they tend to work against us. And I oftentimes think, well, what if the society was built in a way so that we feel proud of who we are, or like move a lot of the time? So I'm not sure how we got to the stage where, it's working against us, but it's good that there are people like you, teaching other people and motivating them.
Likewise, like you.
To move. So
I think that literally feeds on to my final bit, which is, you just talked about teaching. Let's talk about GioMovement, because that is also something that you're a part of as well. We've talked about at length how you're a master of your body. You mastered the handstand, for example, for 9 years. You're a master of other disciplines as well. Let's talk about how you've been also pushing the boundary of, stopping us from going backwards in a sense of removing movement from our lives. Take us a little bit through GioMovement.
So I guess the idea of it, and you'd be well into it as well, is that we growing up now have almost a duty to be role models for people, more so than any other time, because everything is going digital, people are sticking to their computers, and they're sedentary. So that's not movement, that's just not life in general. So there's not, when I was growing up, well, at least when I was growing up, there wasn't such a culture of influencers like it is now, or like fitness people that you look up to. And a lot of the things that I learned, they are not things that I've seen from YouTube. Well, when I started, like, YouTube was barely a thing back
The
then.
good old days.
Yeah, so you didn't really have these resources, so everyone building their own programs and so on and so forth. So it was hard to learn things. You had to do a lot of experiment. You failed a lot. But the point is that when I started to learn the handstands, and now, I teach a lot of handstands because I think it's something that I'm good at, and I have a duty to share it with the people. Just because I think there's two people in the world: people who consume and people who create. And you consume up to a certain point, and then once you consume, and then maybe you get better at something, maybe you don't. But if you got better at something that you think where could help people, it's almost like you have to share it back with the community. You have to. So my journey, and in general with like the teaching, didn't start like from, it wasn't dramatic in the sense that I would be like, oh, I'm gonna make a program now and then teach people this thing. It was more like I was doing my own practice, and then people realized I'm quite good at it. And the way they realized it, because they were asking me questions, a lot of questions, when they would see you in the gym practicing. And then at uni, I was showing people how to do various things. But then as I got out of uni, my friends who I used to teach back in the days, they were like, well, show me a video of how to do that, or teach me this and teach me that. And I ended up sending the same video to multiple people. So then I was like, well, Instagram was just coming up back then. So I was like, let me make an Instagram. And then I can put things on Instagram, you can watch them there. There's no reason for me to send the same video to everyone. So it's literally like a technicality thing. And then from there, I started to share my journey slowly and slowly. And then as I was getting better at handstands, it struck me that when I learned handstands, I literally did not know what to do. And I didn't have like a clear path of what to do. It was just a black box for me. So I was like, what would I have wanted to have had when I learned the handstand, for example? So I wanted, I don't know, to understand everything about the handstand domain, what it is, what are the various things that are there, how to get from one point to the other. I wanted videos for people to show me what are the best methods, when to use those methods. So I was like, let me build something that I wish I had when I started. And that's kind of how I started developing this platform, where it's basically a handstand platform with various resources. And the main idea was that these days on the Instagram, and now it's becoming a lot better, but people learn certain things a certain way, and because they've learned it a certain way, they're super attached to it. And because they're super attached to it, they'll be like, this is what works. So you have people who learn the handstand, for example, a certain way, like kicking up, and they swear by that method. And I'm like, well, is that actually true? And that comes back into teaching, which I'll come back into a minute. There are so many methods out there that one method might work best for one person, one might work best for another person. And so as you're teaching something, you almost have a responsibility not to teach them who you are, but to teach them based on who they are. You can't just say, this worked for me, there you go, eat it, because it's going to work for you. The point of getting a coach is so that the coach doesn't tell you how they've done things, but they tell you how you can get your best results based on you, not based on who they are.
Exactly. I think that that's such a really, really important point, because a lot of people kind of get so subdued into their jargon or into the dogma that perhaps they used. and consumed at some point. Like you said, we're consumers and creators. They consumed at some point to get them to their point. But one thing I think is really nice about having this social media or like influencer age is we are, you know, in essence, the world is a growing marketplace. It's a global marketplace. And nowadays you've got, you know, you mentioned YouTube at the start. If you watched YouTube at the start and you wanted to get into calisthenics, you probably had about 3 or 4 people that you could look at and reference. And they probably had, like you say, their own way of doing it. And they wouldn't necessarily be as accessible as, you know, for example, some of the people now. But nowadays, you've got all of these people who have all gone on a journey, and they've all shared their journey, and they've all got different ways of doing things. And it feels like we're in this day and age where even if you want to find the right program or the right coach, you're basically on Amazon. You can select which coach you want, and you can go through all of their content to see whether it suits you before you make the decision. Say, right, I want you to teach me. So I think it's and also obviously it's such a pleasure to hear that you went on your own journey, and you are the type of guy who wants to put the client or the student first and understand how they work and then suit it to them, rather than, you know, say this is the right way, this is the right way, because there's a lot of people that do that, and I think it's counterproductive.
Yeah, and that's what a good coach should be. So if I was looking for a coach, I wouldn't be like choosing a coach that tells me how they learned things. I would choose a coach that say, I've done your assessment, this is your strengths, this is your weaknesses, this is your goals, this is how we can most efficiently get to your goals. And I don't care whether that method is the one that you chose or it's another method, as long as you teach me the stuff that's most relevant to me. And that's our duty as coaches, is being able to distill that for them, not for us. We're not trying to make them who we are, we're trying to make the best out of the people who we teach. So
Yeah, I think I've spoken about this at length. I think the best coaches are people who struggled with their journey, because the person who learnt the planche in 3 months, I'd argue, actually doesn't have that deep an understanding of the movement itself, because people love to talk about, that guy is just naturally made for that skill. It's not. I don't think anyone's born predisposed. I mean, obviously you've got like different limb lengths and stuff like that, but it depends what sports you've done in the past. That makes a massive difference, whether you'll be good at a specific training method or a specific skill. Someone who maybe spent their whole childhood super into athletics, coach from a very young age, who then learns the front lever in 2 weeks. I'd argue they don't know much about how to teach the front lever, whereas the guy that's maybe taken 5 years to learn it, who's tried every single method, from an outsider's perspective, most people actually might look at him and be like, oh, that guy's shit because it took him 5 years to learn it. I'd argue he's a way better coach, because he's made all the mistakes. He's realized what does work and what doesn't work. He can probably see elements of himself into you. And obviously another way to spot a good coach is someone who's done it with other people. So like how you said, you don't want a coach who says, oh, I learned it by doing this method for myself. You would rather say, oh, I had these 4 different people. These 4 different people have different limb lengths. They all have different things. One guy's got 1 leg, one guy's blind or whatever. But I was able to tailor a program specifically for them because I know what would work for them. I think that's a big key.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess a big clue is to see how much a person, like a coach, says the word I. If it's too much I, then it's probably a red flag somewhere. I mean, it depends. I'm generalizing, obviously. But yeah, it's you have to. I agree with the fact that there's a distinction between athletes and coaches, and athletes are good at performing. Coaches are good at making other people perform, and there's a different skill set there to be able to do that. It's not necessarily that a coach may not necessarily be able to perform all the methods for the handstand or whatnot, as long as they know all of them, they're aware of all of them, and they know how to implement them. They don't have to. They might have as well learned one way, but know of all the others through experience in the industry, and be able to teach those when needed. It doesn't have to perform them all the time. It helps, of course, if you can do all the methods, but for example, in the handstand, there's people who are very flexible, and there's people who are very strong. And then the goal is to match those together, but sometimes, if a person who's hyper flexible, they'll be like insanely good at handstands without having that much strength. So that way, you know, even if they learn with the flexibility method, as long as they look at you and they see, well, you're more of a strength person, if they don't give you all the flexibility stuff that you won't be able to get into because you don't have that background, then as long as they tailor to your strength capabilities, you'll be fine, you know, even though they learned that. So massive distinction between athletes and coaches. So yeah, you have to teach the people, not you know, share your life or something, you know.
I think that's literally spot on, and I think that's I hate to say it, but I think we're also out of time. So that was that's such a good way to.
Yeah.
Sam's going to say something.
Yeah, I think if you want to promote your platform more, just go into more detail about what the handstand is. It Handstand Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think talk about that some bits.
I'll just do a quick 30-second basically. I guess the Handstand Academy is at GioMovementAcademy.com for anyone who wants to check it out. Basically, the idea of it is there's various resources out there based on what we've spoken about. There's all sorts of everything that you'll ever need basically to learn the handstand, to get really good at it, and not to just get good at it, be confident of doing various things in various places. So there's different methods. They're all tailored to who you are as a person. You can do assessments. You can figure out what's your strength, what's your weaknesses. Then you're being walked through which one is the best method for you. And then you go through that, and there's various assessments throughout. There's a lot of stuff. I don't have time to talk about it. I don't think it's necessary. If people are interested, they know how to find it. But yeah, thanks a lot for the plug. Right there.
No, listen, man, that's the whole point. What's the Instagram handle for everyone who doesn't know?
GioMovement.
Amazing. Awesome. All right. Well, listen, like we'll drop his socials down below. We'll also drop the website as well. So if you are someone who wants to learn the handstand, I think plenty of you guys have also come through to us. We are only going to be able to shovel you towards Gio because he is the master of the handstand. So definitely go and check him out. Definitely check out his website. Have you got a YouTube, or is there?
I'm just starting a YouTube right now. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll see. It's difficult to make videos and stuff with everything else that's going on, but I'm trying to keep up with it. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, we can't wait to see that one. And I'm sure we'll do podcasts in the future as well. And we'll be able to, I guess, discuss a bit about how that's gone. So that'll be good. But yeah, amazing. All right. So I hope you guys found that enjoyable. This has been probably one of the most technical, but definitely one of the most interesting ones for us. I'm definitely going to do some flexibility work after this. Yeah, honestly, man, you've motivated me to kind of get back into a routine, because I was doing it when I think it was 2 years ago. I was working on my lower body flexibility, and it got to a decent position, only a couple of weeks. So I'm definitely going to get back on that. So thank you for motivating us. And any last sort of leaving remarks that you want to leave the guys before we close off?
I guess just to keep within the same theme of like coaching and doing your best, it doesn't really matter what you're doing in terms of specific technicalities, as long as you're doing something that's good for you in general, both sports related or in your life. If you're trying to improve your life, you're naturally over time going to go towards what's best. So you may not start with the most efficient thing ever or the best way to do things. As long as you're in it to improve and to better yourself, you're naturally going to tend to the best ways to do over time. So just take action and do your best to become, 1%, 2%, whatever people say, a little bit better every day. And I think you're going to have a good life if you do that.
Amazing. Great. That's a perfect remark to end on. Gio, it's been an absolute pleasure, man.
Likewise.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, guys, make sure you go and work on your flexibility and your mobility. Check out his socials, and we'll catch you on the next one.